Kale and I have arrived at Eagleman in Maryland. We're just going out for a little spin to make sure the bikes are ready to go for tomorrow's race. It's week 27 of the vlog. Sunday was my first pro race. It was Ironman 70.3 Eagleman. Got to Cambridge, Maryland on Saturday morning and took Saturday to get everything set up for bike and equipment and make sure everything was running well. I didn't have really like a time goal or set expectations for the race. With it being first pro race, I wasn't really sure with what would be the same or what would be different. I did have a couple goals for myself. One was that I was really hoping to have the opportunity to ride with somebody through at least part of the race. It's not something that I've ever done before. Like in the past, if I started in a later wave, I'd always be moving up through the field, and I've never actually ridden with anybody. So that was one experience that I was definitely hoping that I was going to get out of the race, but that's not really something that you have too much control over. And then the second, which does contradict that a little bit, is I wanted to make sure that I was just running my own race. So if there were other people around me, that I didn't get too caught up with what was happening around me, and that I didn't suddenly think that I was Superman and was able to do things that I've never been able to do in training. So those were kind of my main goals for the race, and both things that I was able to accomplish. Race morning, I was up at about 4 a.m. Had breakfast of a bagel with some peanut butter and started working on some Gatorade, and then was out the door at about 5:45, headed to the race site. I got transition all set up, and then took a quick swim in swim skin that I was borrowing from Matt Shanks. So thank you very much for letting me borrow the swim skin. In terms of the swim, really wasn't sure what exactly to expect. At the swim start, we all lined up pretty much single file along the buoy line. So on the very left, there were a couple people that were too deep, but for the most part, we were single file across the start. I lined up on the very right, and when the gun went, I just tried to swim as hard as I could. And I was quite surprised that through about the first 100 or 150 meters, the group seemed to stay together, and I was staying with them. But I think at that point they realized, like, what are they doing? They're just they're taking it out way too easy, and they just took off from me. So I thought that I was doing the swim on my own, ended up feeling some hands on my feet, and eventually someone came around me. So I did swim with one or two others, and then through T1, and was able to quickly get on my bike. And something that was definitely a pleasant surprise was starting my bike with Tim Russell. So Tim was just in front of me at the start of the bike, and we were riding a relatively similar pace. So we ended up actually together for I think we were together for the entire ride. Like we swapped some turns in the early stages, and that was an all new experience for me, because it's not something that I've ever had to deal with before, is actually riding with somebody and making sure that you're the legal distance back. So I'd asked Mikhail about this before the race, and he said that if you're 3 seconds back, then that puts you in more than legal distance, so you'll be in good shape. So I spent a lot of the race counting to 3 over and over again to make sure. I definitely didn't want a drafting penalty in my first race. Something that did end up doing for me is I ended up getting a little bit caught up in making sure that I was right distance back and I wasn't on top of my nutrition. So I only ended up eating 1.5 of the 3 waffles that I planned on having, and even with the Gatorade, I would end up drinking a lot of Gatorade at one time and then going long stages without it. So that's something that I'm definitely going to have to work on moving forward. But overall, was relatively happy with the ride. Power was a little bit lower than I wanted, but again, that was dictated in part with just being in a group. Something I learned very early on is early in the ride, Tim's pace had dropped a little bit, so then I picked it up to go around him, and then he picked it up as well. So I had to put out a huge effort for about 15 or 20 seconds just to make sure that I got around him. So in the later stages, from that point on, I did realize that just because someone's power drops briefly doesn't mean that that's a time that you definitely should go and pass them. Heading out onto the run, it was very obvious very quickly that it was going to be a scorcher. It was really, really hot, and I knew right away that I was going to be running based on feel and not based on any specific time goal. I was a little bit stiff when I started the run, and my stomach wasn't in the best shape. A lot of that likely had to do with just me taking in Gatorade in big gulps and not evenly throughout the ride, or throughout my bike. But I just was able to settle into my pace. I wanted to run strong, and I just hoped that some of the other guys might go out a little bit strong and start fading a little bit, and they would come back to me. And that was ultimately what ended up happening. Was I ended up catching a couple guys who I would assume they went out a little bit fast because they were slowing when I met them. And at the aid stations, I just really tried to focus on getting ice down my shorts and as much water and Coke as I can. It was really hot. It's a really exposed run, but I felt like I run relatively well given the conditions, and was able to back off a little bit in the closing kilometers. AJ had passed me running super strong, and he didn't look like he was slowing down, and had put in a big gap in front of me, and there was nobody that close behind me, so I was able to ease off the throttle a little bit coming home. And I finished the race in 11th place in 4:10. So a race that I was really happy with, especially not being totally sure what to expect heading into it. Learned a lot of lessons throughout the race, but definitely think I am better prepared moving forward. My next race is going to be the Skechers Multisport Welland long course race in a couple weeks time, so definitely really looking forward to that. And then it'll just be all focused for Ironman Lake Placid in the end of July. Very big thank you to Ray and Dawn for providing us with a homestay. We really, really appreciated you opening up your beautiful home to us. Also, big thanks once again to Matt Shanks for letting me borrow a swim skin. That was definitely a huge help. And just thank you to everybody who sent me messages before and after the race. I definitely appreciated all the support. If you have any questions about the race, definitely feel free to comment down below or send me a message. And until next time, happy training.
Oh, this you crazy mother.